Hello everyone, I'm Ankit and you're watching Study IQ IAS English. In our today's video, we'll cover the latest economic survey that has been published today, that is the economic survey of the year 2025 and 26. Now, there are multiple ways in which you can cover the economic survey. You can go through the lengthy document that is published by the Finance Ministry every year. This year, this document is over 750 pages. But do you think you'll be able to cover 750 pages at one go in a quick amount of time? The answer obviously is no. So what is the other way of covering economic survey? The other way of covering economic survey is to watch this complete video. Now what I'll do in this complete video, I'll pick up important data and facts from the economic survey and I will present it to you. But not just that, I will also help you break down the important concepts and schemes that are being mentioned in the economic survey because all of them become important from your UPSC exams perspective. In UPSC prelims exam, as you can understand, the UPSC might ask you a question related to economy which may have been mentioned in the economic survey. And on the other hand, you can use the arguments, you can use the facts that I present you in the economic survey discussion to supplement your answer writing when it comes to GS paper 3 in the mains examination of UPSC. So that is the utility of economic survey as far as UPSC exam is concerned. Right? So let us start our today's discussion by understanding the economic survey and the notes which I will be using in our today's session. In case if you want to download them, you can go to a particular Telegram channel which name is ATS Live. This Telegram channel, you will find the notes which will be available few minutes after this video ends. And to get similar updates in the future, please do not forget to subscribe to this channel as well. So let us start by understanding the context of our today's discussion. Now, as you can understand, economic survey is presented by the Union Finance Minister every year in the Parliament a day before the budget. Now, there is a healthy convention that has been developed. What is this convention I'm talking about? Now, convention is basically a practice that has been going on for quite a few times. Now, this convention has developed that every year on the first day of February, the government presents the union budget. And one day before the union budget, the government usually presents economic survey. What is an economic survey? Economic survey is a detailed evaluation of Indian economy. And in the economic survey, you'll find many important data like macroeconomic indicators. What are macroeconomic indicators I'm talking about? How much has India's GDP grown in the past year? How much will India's GDP grow in the next year? Similarly, it also presents you the data relating to the government's borrowing every year, that is highlighted by fiscal deficit. What is the sectoral performances of each and every important sector in Indian economy? As you can understand, Indian economy can be divided into three sectors. Primary sector, primarily being agriculture. Then there is the second sector called as manufacturing, followed by services. So all of these sectors individually, how they have performed in the last 1 year will be given or will be provided in the economic survey. As I told you, there has been a healthy convention that was developed that economic survey is usually presented one day before the budget, that is on 31st of January. But this year you will be surprised to know we are today discussing this economic survey on 29th of January. So government has broken this convention by bringing economic survey few days before the budget, not just one day before the budget, in order to give you certain important ideas or to give you an idea what the government is thinking. Right? Now let us understand who prepares economic survey. Economic survey is prepared by a specific department of Ministry of Finance called as Department of Economic Survey. Yes, this is the very department which is also responsible for preparing the annual financial statement, informally called as a budget. Now, there is a distinction that you need to know. Budget every year, which is presented by the government, is for the next financial year. The next financial year, this time for the budget would be 2026 and 27. On the other hand, the economic survey is presenting what has happened in the economy in the current financial year. What is the current financial year? It is 2025 and 26. That is why the nomenclatures of economic survey is different than the nomenclature of the budget. Now, as the Department of Economic Affairs is responsible for preparing the budget, this very department is also the one that prepares economic survey. But this economic survey is presented or prepared under the guidance of Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, who is presently Dr. Anantha Nageshwar. Understood the basics of economic survey? Now you must be thinking, why do we need to study economic survey? Yes. First of all, you have to understand economic survey presents you important data of what was happening in Indian economy, that is in the year 2025 and 26. So it sets up the context for policy debate in the next 1 year, and it also shapes up the expectation of what people can expect in the upcoming budget. As I told you, budget will be made public on 1st of February. And we are right now on 29th of January. So this economic survey will give you an idea of how budget would be, that will be presented few days from now. And economic survey is widely regarded as an indicator of government's policy stance. So will government spend more on infrastructure? Will government spend more on welfare spending? Will government spend more on defense sector? All of this idea, where would you get it from? You will get it from the economic survey. Right? And that is why we can understand how this thinking of the government may also influence its upcoming budget. So this is the utility for a normal person to study and go through what is given in the economic survey. Got it? Now for our today's discussion, we will divide our discussion into multiple halves. I'll start with the first chapter of economic survey, and just like every book, even the economic survey's first chapter would give you a macro point of view of what is going on in the economy. So I will set the macro point of view, what is going on in the economy, and going forward, we will move sector by sector, how government plans to develop agricultural sector, what is the government's policy for manufacturing sector, what is the performance of service sector, everything we will discuss. Similarly, we will also discuss important factors that has played an important role for the government to decide its fiscal policy, as well as for the RBI to decide its monetary policy, right? So let us start our today's discussion with this first chapter that gives a macroeconomic point of view of the economy, that is the state of economy. Now this economic survey starts with a context. This shows that globally the economic environment remains fragile. What is fragile? Fragile basically means weak. Now what are the factors responsible for this weakness of global economy? The economy in global has become weak because of intensifying geopolitical tensions. As you can understand, for the past 4 years, Russia-Ukraine war is continuing, and there are no signs that this war will end in a near future. Similarly, Iran, that is located in Middle East, it is facing tense relationship with US, and there is a possibility that in near future, US may directly or indirectly be involved in a conflict with Iran. Similarly, not so long ago, US attacked Venezuela, and as you can understand, Venezuela is world's largest reserve of crude oil. So how this attack would impact global economy, this is the reason why global economy remains fragile. Also, you need to understand globally there has been a trend called as trade fragmentation. This was in contrast to the previous model of development that was characterized by globalization. Who was the champion of globalization? It was none other than United States. Now come to think of it, when Donald Trump has been elected as the president of India, and president of United States, and he has completed 1 year tenure as a president of United States, and his most important political promise was that he would impose more tariffs on each and every good that will be imported into US. So because of this imposition of tariff, which has also been imposed on Indian goods that are exported to US, this has created a trend of trade fragmentation. So when economy across the globe was globalized, this has broke that trend into a more fragmented economy, which you can understand as to how Even the government of India is looking to sign free trade agreements with its important partners like European Union, like United Arab Emirates, like Australia, like New Zealand. And why is government of India signing these free trade agreements? So as to deal with the fragmented trade economy that can be traced to the imposition of tariff by the US president. Similarly, this fragmentation of global trade, this weakening of the geopolitical tension contributes to financial vulnerabilities. How will it contribute to financial vulnerabilities? Let us understand this deeply. Now, as you can understand, India imports 88% of its total domestic crude oil requirement. So for India, the policy priority is to ensure that the crude oil is imported at a lesser cost. But as I told you, due to this geopolitical tension which is spread across the globe, there can be a pressure that the prices of crude oil might increase. And when the prices of crude oil increase, obviously India's import bill will increase. And this will create what? This will create more inflation in Indian economy, thereby creating macroeconomic problems. So this is why the state of global economy, which continues to remain fragile, is a bad news for everyone, including India. But look at how beautifully Economic Survey puts this. Economic Survey first sets the stage by calling the global economy fragile. And it says even in this fragile global economy, India stands against the other countries. Why? Because of the first advanced estimates that have come for GDP growth rate in the present financial year. The Economic Survey states that India's real GDP growth rate this year is expected to be at 7.4%. So when global economy remains fragile, India will grow by 7.4%, which would make India world's fastest growing major economy. And is this just an aberration? No. This has been the trend for the past 4 years. India is, and India will continue to remain one of the largest, and not the one of the largest growing major economy across the world. So this shows that something must be right in Indian economy, right? This is the reason why we are growing so hard. So what is right? This is what we'll understand in our today's discussion. Okay. Now, what you have to understand that to calculate GDP, there are multiple methods to calculate GDP. One of the most used method is called as expenditure method. In expenditure method, we calculate expenditures done by different sectors in the economy. And when you add all the expenditures done in the economy for every year, you will get India's, or any economies for that matter, the gross domestic product. Now, to calculate GDP in Indian economy every year by expenditure method, you calculate the you calculate private final consumption expenditure. Then you add to it gross final capital formation. Then you add to it the government final consumption expenditure and net export. So all of these factors, if you add totally, you will get India's GDP. Now let us consider the first factor called as the private final consumption expenditure, which is the biggest contributor to India's GDP. Now this is Economic Survey. It states that the private final consumption expenditure, it reached to a level of 61.5% of GDP. So how much is private final consumption expenditure contributing to our GDP? More than 61%. And there is a very good reason for it. Why? India's GDP is driven by the consumption expenditure by the households. And this is supported by presently low levels of inflation and stable employment. What happens due to low inflation and stable employment? The disposable income of the household increases. And when disposable income of the household increases, this automatically leads to more spending by households on goods and services. And when inflation level is low and the disposable income remains high, you need to understand the purchasing power of the Indian economy increases. Let me give you a very simple example. Let us suppose every month you are looking to spend 100 rupees. And at that month, the price of one apple was rupees 10. So from that logic, you will be able to buy how many apples? You will be able to buy 10 apples. So your purchasing power is 10 apples for a month. Now let us imagine due to low inflation, the price of apple reduces from rupees 10 to rupees 5 per piece. So even if you have same 100 rupees to spend, but now you will be able to buy how many apples? You will be able to buy twice as many apples. That means 20 apples. So this shows that due to low inflation, due to stable disposable income, it increases your real purchasing power. Now, what is contributing to this real purchasing power and high disposable income in India? Let us divide our discussion in rural and urban areas. You need to understand rural Indian economy is primarily driven by agriculture. So whenever agricultural yields or the state of agricultural sector in India improves, it improves the consumption levels in the rural sector. And this is what has happened this year because of plentiful Kharif monsoon that has led to strong agricultural performance, which has boosted the rural expenditure. Similarly, let us now consider what primary drives the urban expenditure. Now, if you can recall last year, government did some tax realization. What it did, it reduced the direct tax burden on Indian people by reducing the income taxes. Now, the direct consequence of reduction in income taxes is that now people would have more disposable income because their tax burden has been reduced. And when people will have more disposable income, it would automatically lead to higher spending. And as you can understand, mostly where do taxpayers live? Taxpayers usually live in urban areas. So when the tax burden on urban people reduces, it automatically boosts the spending levels, thereby contributing to the private final consumption expenditure. Understood? Now let us consider the second factor, that is gross fixed capital formation. Now, gross fixed capital formation basically means the infrastructural investment which is done by both government as well as the private sector. Now, this gross fixed capital formation, on an average, it contributes to about 30% of India's GDP. Now, for the past few years, since especially COVID-19 pandemic, the government's capital expenditure has increased. Why did government increase its capital expenditure in COVID-19 pandemic? Government thought by increasing capital expenditure, we will create more infrastructure. And to create more infrastructure, we would be providing more employment. As you can understand, more and more people are required to build an infrastructure, right? So when you create more employment, automatically the disposable income of Indian households increase. How is disposable income increasing? Because people are getting employed, they are getting salaries. So when people will have more disposable income, you can directly understand this would lead to higher spending levels in the Indian economy. And this is what will drive even the private final consumption expenditure. And this cycle, the government thought it would create a virtuous impact on Indian economy. Virtuous means positive impact on Indian economy. So this was government's realization for increasing its capex even during a stress period like COVID-19 pandemic. Now let us consider another scenario. When government is creating more and more infrastructure, who is going to benefit out of it? The private citizens will benefit out of it. The corporate sector will benefit out of it. Let us suppose government creates a road infrastructure or a rail infrastructure. So if you're a businessman, you'll look to establish a business near that road where the government has created a highway, right? And when you establish a business, eventually you are going to employ more people. And when people will have higher disposable income, their demand for goods and services increase. Now, if you were a smart businessman, well, smart businessman is what you can say a misnomer. Every businessman is a smart. Now, when there is a high demand for goods and services in an economy, you need to understand the businesses would look to create a commensurate supply. Now, how will you create more supply in the economy? You will increase the capacity of your existing factories, or you will even establish newer factories. And all of this, you can understand, will create more employment. Now you get it now why I was saying that this is a virtuous cycle, that government increases capital expenditure, it creates more infrastructure, which leads to employment, more infrastructure, which means private sector investment will happen. Private sector, just by looking at more demand, will look to create more supply. They will increase the capacity of their existing factories, or they will create new factories, and by creating new factories you are providing more employment. More employment means more disposable income. So this cycle would continue spiral and it will increase further, contributing to the virtuous cycle of the economy. Got it? Now let us understand what are the important fiscal developments. Fiscal developments basically means the changes government introduces via budget, most importantly in its taxation policy, right? Now the objective of any government's budget is to increase the revenue and to decrease mostly the revenue expenditure. What are revenue expenditures? These are expenditures made on day-to-day expenses like salaries, like pensions, or even including the welfare schemes. And government, by reducing the revenue expenditure, would want to increase capital expenditure. Why would government want to increase capital expenditure? In the previous slide, I've already covered it. Now, for the past few years, after COVID-19 pandemic, the government presently is on the path of prudent fiscal management. What is prudent fiscal management? The government would look to reduce its borrowings so as to put down the levels of fiscal deficit, and ultimately the government's aim is to reduce the overall debt burden that it has. So whenever government reduces its borrowing, it reduces its fiscal deficit, it reduces its debt. That is called as a prudent fiscal management. Now, whenever government has a prudent fiscal management, this sends very good signal to the global economy. The global economy, the investors would look that the government is looking at stability. And when there is a stability in the economy, which is right there in India right now, it would invite more foreign investment. Right? So this reinforces the macroeconomic fundamentals. So because of the stable macroeconomic fundamentals, more and more foreign investment happen. And am I lying? No, there are evidences relating to it. Look at the sovereign credit ratings upgrade which are done by the private agencies. Now, whenever government issues a bond, it is called as a government security. And every bond, before being introduced in the market for borrowing purposes, they need to get a credit rating. Who provides this credit rating? Private agencies. Now, higher is the credit rating of any bond, the lower would be the interest rate that the government would need to pay. So lower is the interest rate, you can understand the cost of borrowing would also reduce. This is a given. Now, government, whenever it borrows money, if it would look to reduce the cost. And with this upgradation in sovereign credit rating by private agencies like Morningstar, S&P Global, and Rating and Information, it shows that government's fiscal prudence has paid rich dividends in keeping the objective of budget. What was the objective of budget? Increasing the revenue income, reducing the revenue expenditure, and reducing the cost of borrowing, which wants to keep the fiscal deficit down. Understood? So this shows that fiscal developments have been in favor of Indian economy. And what has created this favor? It is the prudent fiscal management of the government. Now, the government's revenue receipt, that is the income government gets through taxes, through other revenue sources, all of this has improved last year. Earlier, it was 8.5% of the GDP in the first half of this decade, and this has increased from 8.5 to 9.2 in the 5 years of 2025. Now, what does this show? This shows that the government's revenue has increased. And what has contributed to this increased revenue? That is buoyant non-corporate tax collection. What is a buoyancy when it comes to tax collection? You need to understand, whenever your GDP increases, there should be a commensurate increase in tax collection of the government. That is measured by tax buoyancy. So let us suppose if your GDP increases by 1% and if your tax collection is buoyant, your tax collection would also be increasing by 1%. And if your tax collection is not buoyant, with every 1% increase in GDP, your tax collection would be less than 1%. And as it says, due to buoyant non-corporate taxes, what are non-corporate taxes? Mostly It is the income taxes. So due to increase in income tax collection, the overall revenue collection and revenue receipts of the government has increased. And this again highlights my point. What is the objective of any budget? Earn more and spend less. So government now is earning more. Why? Because of rationalization of taxes, because of increase in tax collection. Now the direct tax base has increased steadily. What has contributed to increase on the direct tax base? Basically, how many people are paying income taxes. This is what we understand by direct tax base. Earlier, it was 6.9 crore in the financial year of 2022, but it has increased to 9.2 crore in the financial year of 2025. Now, this has been due to serious efforts made by the government. First of all, government has looked to increase compliances. More are more people now who were earlier eligible but not paying the taxes. Now they've been asked to pay the taxes. Why now they are paying the taxes? Because government uses greater technology. With the use of technology, the process of filing IT returns have been made easy. You just simply need to log into the income tax website, just fill the form, which comes pre-filled by the way, and the income tax return filings is done. Similarly, due to growth in Indian economy, as I told you, disposable income and the income levels of people has increased. So when income levels of people has increased, earlier people who were below the threshold from where income taxes are levied, now they have crossed this threshold and they have started paying taxes, right? And I told you initially, last year government took options like tax rationalization. It declared that anyone who is earning less than 12 lakh rupees annually will not be required to pay income taxes. Now you must be thinking, when government is exempting taxes on people to people who are earning up to 12 lakh rupees, how has it led to increase in tax revenue? To understand this, you need to understand a very basic concept in the economy called as Laffer curve. Now, Laffer curve is a graph that tells you what is the correlation between tax rate and what is the relation with tax rate with tax collection. Now, and this graph goes like this. And so suppose if I increase the tax rate, the overall tax collection reduces. If I reduce the tax rate, the overall tax collection reduces. Where is the tax collection maximum? At this level. What is this level called? This is called as a optimum tax rate. So there is a certain tax rate which you impose, it would lead to highest collection. And who is telling us? It is the Laffer curve that is telling us. And this optimum tax rate is what government rationalized to, which has led to more collection of tax money. Understood? So this is what we got from the Laffer curve. Now let us understand other fiscal developments. Right now we were covering the direct taxes. Now let us talk about indirect taxes. The largest amount of indirect taxes collected in India is or are goods and services taxes. Now the total goods and services tax that has been collected by the government in the financial year of 2025 up till December, obviously, because this is the data that the economic survey has highlighted, it is 17.4 lakh crore rupees, which shows a growth of 6.7% from the similar period last year. Now, GST growth rate is actually directly linked with India's economic growth rate. More economy grows, more GST collection happens. But one of the factors that has played a very important role in increase in GST collection is the rationalization government did in the GST tax regime this year. What did government rationalize? Earlier there were 5 slabs. Government has reduced these 5 slabs to just 3 slabs. So this reduces the tax arbitrage. That was the characteristics when you have 5 different slabs where you need to characterize and categorize different objects into. And this also leads to more filing of GST tax returns, and the consequence of which is in front of you. The GST tax collection has improved. Now, do you understand what does GST, gross GST collection means? Now, gross GST and the difference between net GST collection is the gross minus cost of collection. So when you eliminate cost of collection from the gross GST collection, you get net GST collection. Understood? What we understood was gross GST collection. Similarly, there is a term which is highlighted in the budget multiple times. It is called as effective capital expenditure. Now, what is an effective capital expenditure? To calculate effective capital expenditure, what you need to understand is you add central government's tax collection, that is the capital expenditure, and to this you add the grants that the center gives to state governments for creation of infrastructure. So when you add center's capital expenditure with the grant that it gives to the state governments for creation of infrastructure, the figure that you get is effective capital expenditure. And this is the effective capital expenditure that has happened in Indian economy due to the money spent by central government. Now, this rose from 2.7% of the GDP before the pandemic era to 3.9% in the post-pandemic era. And this year, in the financial year of 2025, this increased to 4% of the GDP. So what trend did you get? The effective capital expenditure has continuously increased in the post-pandemic period. Now, you must have seen the UPSC PYQs, right? UPSC PYQs usually don't ask you questions relating to a particular year's expenditure pattern. What it asks you is the broader trend. And understanding these broader trends are very important if you have to read the economic survey properly. Now, government gives many grants to the state government, including a special assistant to state for capital expenditure. And this has incentivized the state government to maintain their capital spending at around 2.4% of the GDP. And who has contributed to it? It is the total capital expenditure or effective capital expenditure by whom? By central government. How do we calculate effective capital expenditure? Once again, we add center's capital expenditure. To that, we add grants given by the central government to the state governments for infrastructure creation. Now, I told you one of the important policy prerogatives of the union government is to reduce the amount of borrowing it does, which is highlighted by the figure called as fiscal deficit. Now, if the fiscal deficit is high, it ultimately adds to the inflation levels in the economy. Now, when you combine the fiscal deficit of all the state governments, this has broadly stayed at 2.8% in the post-pandemic period. But there is a break in the pattern. You must have realized many of the state governments have started giving freebies. From Ladli Behan Yojana to distributing cookers, to distributing laptops, to distributing bicycles, the state governments are on a freebie spree. And the consequence of this freebie spree is that there has increased the fiscal deficit of state burdens, which adds to the financial pressure on them. Right? But despite this increased level of borrowings by the state government, the general government debt to GDP ratio, general government means the debt levels of center plus all the state governments. All this put together, the debt to GDP ratio was about 7.1% and it has reduced 7.1% after the pandemic period, right? Now, if you can recall, there is an act called as Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act 2003. This act states that the general government debt should be about 60% of GDP, right? So the debt to GDP ratio should be 60%. Due to COVID-19 pandemic and its pressures on the fiscal policy of the government increased its borrowing in the COVID-19 pandemic. But after that, government has gradually reduced its borrowing levels to reduce the general government debt by 7.41% of the GDP. So this shows government is on a path of fiscal prudence and it is only a matter of time up till the FRBM targets, which was set in 2003, will be achieved again by the government. Right? Now let us talk about the monetary management. What are there in the monetary policy? The sector performances of the bank and the total money supply and inflation, right? First, let us consider the banking sector performance. There has been a significant improvement which has been observed in the asset quality of the scheduled commercial banks. Any scheduled commercial banks, its asset qualities can be gauged by gross NPAs and net NPAs. Now, the difference between gross NPA and net NPA, you need to understand. To calculate net NPA, what you do, to calculate net NPA, you take gross NPA and you minus the provisioning that the banks have done against those NPAs. What is a provisioning? Provisioning is basically percentage of loan amount that the banks keep aside from their profits and capital in order to compensate for the loans that have become NPA. So when you minus provisioning from gross NPA, you get net NPA. And this gross NPA of India's banking sector and even the net NPA of India's banking sector have reduced to an alarmingly low level, which shows that the fiscal health, the financial health of India's banking sector is good. And year-on-year growth of outstanding credit, that is the total amount of loans given by scheduled commercial banks, has increased from 11.2% to 14.5%. What do more loans show in an economy? That there is a higher demand for goods and services. And why do you take more loans? So as to increase your capital expenditure. So this shows that the state of Indian economy is in good health. And how we have derived it? Through the financial stability of the banks and through the total outgoing of loans by scheduled commercial banks in India, right? Now let us understand financial inclusion. What is financial inclusion? Financial inclusion basically means provision of financial services to the poor sections of the society. What financial services? Banking services, insurance services, loans, credit, etc. Right? So when poor sections of the society get financial services, that shows your economy is having financial inclusion. Now, in the past few years, especially when this government came in 2014, one of its objective was to ensure financial inclusion. And for that, it started Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. What is a Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana? This is a scheme by Union government which promotes or which encourages the bank to open zero bank balance account to all unbanked houses in our country. And that is why 36.63 crore of accounts have been opened up till March last year in total rural and urban areas in India. Similarly, to offer loans to the marginalized section of the society, that is scheduled castes, scheduled tribes as well as women entrepreneurs, the government started a Stand Up India scheme where loans are offered by the banks from 10 lakh rupees to 10 crores to budding entrepreneurs from these marginalized section, and this also would mean setting up of new greenfield enterprises. What is a greenfield enterprise? Suppose you have a factory and if you want to increase the capacity of that factory, that development would be a brownfield development. But if you start making a factory from the scratch, from the bare land, that would mean a greenfield enterprise. So any entrepreneur would get a loan under Stand Up India if it belongs to one of these sections and if it wants to set up a all new company from the scratch. Understood? Now there are two more important schemes that highlights why government is so serious about the financial inclusion. First is PM Street Vendor Atmanirbhar Nidhi scheme. Now one of the problems that many people faced during COVID-19 pandemic, especially the street hawkers, was that they were left with no money to restart their business. So what government did? It offered collateral free working capital for as low as 10,000 rupees to them so that they can restart their business and they can get back on their feet. This was the doing of PM Swanidhi scheme. Similarly, there is a Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana. Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana provides loans to small enterprises in multiple products. There is a Sishu loan which is offered for 10,000 rupees. Then there is a Kishore loan which is offered to from 1 lakh to 5 lakh rupees, and beyond 5 lakh rupee loan there is a Tarun loan which is offered up till 10 lakh rupees. Now government 2 budgets back introduced a new category, that is Tarun Plus category, where the existing Tarun loan borrowers who have successfully repaid their loan backs, they are eligible to get loans up to 20 lakh rupees. And this is the doing of Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana, where small enterprises in manufacturing, trading and services and even in allied agricultural activities, the entrepreneurs are given loans in multiple forms up till how much rupees? Up till 20 lakh rupees, right? So this shows why financial inclusion has happened in our country. Now, one of the recent development that has happened in Indian economy is financialization of Indian markets. Now, earlier, at the time when our fathers were saving money, one of the safest option to save money was to open a fixed deposit at the bank account, right? How many old people do you know were involved in stock trading or stock investing earlier? No, right? But due to onset of technology, we have seen that in our smartphones, there are apps like Grow, like Zerodha, like Angel One, who give you an option to invest in stock markets. And this is all because of the internet revolution that has happened in the country and a byproduct of the uncertainty that was created in COVID-19 pandemic. And because of that, the demat accounts in India have started to open. What is a demat account? Now, to get yourself involved in a financial transaction where money transfer is involved, you open a bank account, right? So in a bank account, what do you store? You store money. But when you trade in stocks, what are you storing? You are storing stocks. You are storing government securities. To store stocks, to store government securities, you need a special kind of an account, which is called as a demat account. So when more people will have a demat account, you can safely say that now more people are participating in stock trading, more people are investing in mutual funds, right? And this is what has happened. Now, key milestone what happened this year in India, that there are 12 crore unique investors in India in September 2025, and to your surprise, nearly a fourth, that is 25% of them are women. Now, what does this show? Women have become more financially aware. When women invest in stock market and they make healthy returns, it increases the women empowerment. When women will have more money with themselves, naturally it would strengthen their place in the society. It would give them more say in things which is happening in their families, which is happening in an area where they live. And this is a direct symbol of women empowerment. How is women empowerment happened? Due to technology, due to stock market, due to financialization of India's savings. Understood? Similarly, a important development that has happened in the financial markets, you must have seen the ads, right? Mutual fund sahi hai. And mutual funds is one of the best opportunities where you can safely invest your money because the diversity mutual fund offers. Now, in the past few years, mutual fund industry has also expanded. There are 5.9 crore fresh investors by the end of 2025 and 3.5 crore were or are located in smaller towns that are non-tier 1 and non-tier 2 city. What does this development show you? That investment in stock markets, investment in mutual funds is not just driven by urban areas. It's not just driven by metropolitan cities. It has now trickled down to even smaller cities in India. And how is that become possible? Due to improvement in technology, right? This shows diffusion of financial participation even beyond the traditional urban centers that are metropolitan centers, right? And India's first international financial services center and GIFT City has also improved opportunities for foreign investors to invest in India. Now, if you were a entrepreneur in India and everywhere else, and if you wanted to invest your money into India, you had to route through other important financial centers in the world, either through London, through Dubai, or even through Singapore. Now, that option you can exercise even in India, where GIFT City has been opened in Gujarat to channel the financialization, to channel the investments directly into India from foreign investors. Now let us talk about the external sector. This sector has been in news throughout the year because of tariffs, because of the restrictions on trade, because of continuous depreciation of rupee. Now, one of the important factors that we cover in export or external sector is how much India exports and how much India imports. To break it to you, India traditionally has seen more imports of goods and services as compared to exports of goods and services. And this is the reason why we have what is called as current account deficit. Now, what does current account deficit includes? It includes trade invisibles. What is trade invisibles? It is trade in goods. Then it includes trade in invisibles. What do invisibles constitute? It constitutes services, it constitutes income, and it constitutes transfers like remittances, right? Now let us understand the fact how much export does India do as compared to the world's total exports. India's share in global exports of goods, that is global merchandise exports, was earlier 1%. Now this has increased to 1.8%, right? So nearly we can say India's total merchandise exports have doubled. Similarly, the share of global commercial services exports in India, this is also more than doubled from 2% to 4.3%. So on a broader level, you can understand the exports of goods has increased and the exports of services has increased. How much it has increased? To nearly doubled and to 2.15 times, right? So more than doubled in both cases. Similarly, important reports and indices, whenever they are published, the organization who's publishing them becomes important. So there is a indice or report called as Trade and Development Report. Who is publishing them? UNICTAD, right? UNICTAD has ranked India as one of the leading economies in trade partner diversification. What does diversification of trade means? It means that you are exporting and importing with multiple countries as against only a handful of countries. So the more importers and exporters you have, or the more destinations your goods are going to, it means more diversified your trade is, right? And India ranks third in global south, and its trade diversity ranks higher, even comparable to the global north economies, that is the developed economies, right? So this shows India's trade has diversified. Who is showing this? Trade and Development Report. Who is publishing this report? UNICTAD. Understood? So this is how you pick up important details from economic survey, right? Now, India's total exports this year has seen a record of $825 billion. And this is despite the fact where India's exports have faced higher tariffs in its largest export market, that is United States of America. Now, how is that happened? Because we have successfully been able to diversify our trades, right? So this shows that our trade, be it in merchandise, be it in exports, have increased, right? Now, important commodities that we export includes petroleum, includes jewelry, includes gems. Even if you exclude these important export products that India have, all these products other than I've mentioned, they account for almost 80% of our total exports. So this shows that we are not just dependent on handful of commodities for our exports. We have diversified even our export basket. Similarly, services is what India is known for. In India's economy, more than 50% of it is contributed by service sector, and we are one of the largest services exporter in the world. India's service export touched all-time high, and this has positioned India as a global hub for technology and business services. As you can understand, recently there has been a trend where global capability centers of big American, big multinational conglomerates, their service exports are being done through India's GCC, where Indian offices are being set up in urban areas, and these provide services export, so much so that highly skilled services export. Now, the current account deficit that I talked to you about, basically the difference between imports and exports has remained modest, or it has remained moderate. Why it has remained moderate? Because our services exports have increased, and this has brought many dollars into India. Similarly, India is known for its remittances. You'll be surprised to know India is world's largest recipient of remittances. What are remittances? Let me give you a very simple example. You know Sundar Pichai, right? Sundar Pichai is who? Sundar Pichai is CEO of Alphabet. Alphabet is the parent company of Google. So when Sundar Pichai, who hails from India, lives in US and his parents live in Madras. So suppose Sundar Pichai is sending money to their parents in Madras, right? So this is a dollar flowing into Indian economy, but this is a one-way payment. Can you expect the parents of Sundar Pichai to return the money back to his son? No, obviously not, right? So this one way payments that comes from outside into India, or the payment that goes from India to other countries, one way payments, these are called as remittances. Now, as you can understand, Indian people are present across the globe. So when Indian people who are living across the globe, and when they are investing into India, when they are sending money to their parents and to their loved ones, all of this would contribute to what? All of this would contribute to remittances. And India is the world's largest recipient. How much it receives every year? Last year it received $135.4 billion, right? And the share of remittances, you'll be surprised to know, has increased from advanced economy. There was this earlier trend. Indian people used to work as laborers in the Gulf countries. So this was the highest place from where our remittances would come in. But now the trend has changed. The trend has changed that in advanced economies like UK, like US, this is where Indian people are living more now. And that is why more money are coming from advanced economies as compared to Gulf countries. So this is a new trend that you need to understand, important from an exams perspective, right? Now, let us deal with India's external sector. One of the often highlighted aspect of India's strength in external sector is the size of its forex reserve, which has crossed $700 billion in the January 2026. Now, is this absolute amount important? Or if I say India's foreign exchange reserve is more than $700 billion, how would you know this is enough for India? There are few parameters that you can use to identify how much forex reserve is important. One of this is how much import it will do in case every dollar inflow and outflow stops. Now, if we solely use our forex reserve to finance our imports, India will be able to finance 11-month worth of imports, which is a good sign. Similarly, how much our external debt the forex reserves cover? It covers 94% of our external debt. So total debt that we have borrowed from other countries, even if we use forex reserves to pay them, 94% of it would be paid back successfully. So this is what highlights the strength of India's external sector, that yes, we have a very high amount of forex reserve, and the sufficiency of forex reserve can be highlighted by import cover and external debt, right? And this strengthens our resilience in case of external volatility. Let rupee depreciate. Why is Indian government not so much worried about depreciation of rupee? Because we have sizable portion of forex reserve, which is just highlighted by this graph. See how it has improved in the last 10 years. It was $341.64 billion. It has increased by more than 2 times to $701.4 billion. Now, due to the subdued global investment environment, I told you, right, globally the economy is not doing well. It is just India which is an aberration. Despite this subdued environment, India continues to attract substantial foreign investment inflow. And you know which is the sector that is seeing most foreign investment? That is the services sector, right? And to your surprise, greenfield investment announcement has led to more inflow of foreign investment. And India recorded the lowest level of inflation. Now, for any economy to be stable, the levels of inflation should be low. So when inflation is low, people would have more income in their pocket, and ultimately they will spend more income, right? Now, India has witnessed lowest inflation rate since the beginning of our consumer price index series. Give me a second, I'll have a water, then we'll resume, okay? Now, presently, the government has given a inflation target to RBI, that RBI should look to keep the levels of inflation measured by CPI between 2% till 6%. So this is the inflation target that RBI wants to achieve. As against this inflation target, India's inflation last year has remained below this threshold. It stays 1.7%. Now, why has inflation moderated? The primary reason for this moderation in inflation is disinflation trend in prices of food and fuel. Now, what is disinflation? When inflation rate reduces from 8% to 6%, to 4% to 1%, this reduction in the rate of inflation is called as disinflation. But if it decreases from 4% to minus 2%, this reduction in inflation is called as deflation. Understood the difference between disinflation and deflation? What has happened is reduction in inflation, that is disinflation. In which commodities? In food and fuel. And these commodities account for more than 50% of weight in the CPI basket. So when more than 50% of weight in CPI basket, the prices have cooled down. This has led to cooling of inflation. And when you consider major emerging market economies, India has the lowest level of inflation. And lowest level of inflation shows that there is a rise in disposable income. Now let us talk about an often overlooked sector in the Indian economy which contributes highest to the employment generation. It is the agricultural sector, right? Now, in the past few years, there has been a trend or the focus of the government to increase the share of allied activities in agriculture. What are allied activities? Allied activities includes animal husbandry. Animal husbandry includes animals, that is livestock, and it includes fisheries, that is the use of fisheries, right? Now, this is in line with government's focus on improvement in nutrition. And as I said, the levels of disposable income is increasing. People are spending more on nutrition. And how would you get nutrition? By having protein-rich food, which the livestock and fishery sector provide, right? So, because of this rise in disposable income, you'll see the contribution of allied activities in agricultural sector has increased, and this mirrors to both the trend that I talked to you about, the livestock and fisheries sector. Similarly, one of the important trends that you have to understand, how much agricultural output is there in India. First, let us understand the trend. Can you see a very simple trend from what I discussed? Continuously in the past 10 years, without a break, India's food grain production has increased. So this is one trend that you have to notice. How much is India's food grain production? It has reached the level of 357.7 million metric ton. Right? Now this is more than the previous 254 million metric ton, and this growth has been driven by higher output of rice, wheat, maize, as well as core cereals. Core cereals like rabi, bajra, jowar, these have been categorized by the government as Shri Ann. So all of these important grains that we eat on a daily basis, the production of these grains have increased. What is contributing to this increase in production? We'll discuss it later, right? Now, despite food grain output, horticultural sector means cultivation of fruits and vegetables, right? As I told you, due to increased disposable income, now people are willing to eat more nutritious food, which the horticultural sector would provide. Despite rising food grain, it is the horticultural sector which is accounting for 1/3 of total agricultural gross value added. And you will be surprised to know, last year, the total horticultural production in India was 362 million metric tons, which is more than the estimated food grain production of 357.73 million tons. So production in horticulture, it is more than production of food grain. This is an important development that you'll have to remember. And how much does horticultural contribute in our total agriculture sector? 1/3 of the gross value added, right? Now, similarly, one of the priorities of the government is to increase the income levels of farmers. How can you increase the income levels of farmer? By reducing the wastage, by improvement in marketing facilities, by improvement in storage facilities. And for that, the government has introduced what? Government has introduced Agricultural Market Infrastructure Scheme, Agriculture Infrastructure Fund, and to promote marketing so as to get or let farmers earn more income, government has connected all the national agricultural markets through a portal called as eNAM portal. On eNAM portal, as against the present scenario, to sell an agricultural product, the farmers needs to visit the nearest APMC mandi. right? So this adds to the transportation cost, this adds to the physical burden that is there on the farmers. Similarly, in APMC Mandi, only the traders from the nearby areas would come, right? So you won't be able to sell, for example, a farmer in Punjab won't be able to sell their produce to a trader that is located in Tamil Nadu. But this is not the case anymore. All the APMC mandis in India will be connected through ENAM scheme individually via internet. And what the farmers need to do, they just need to open their smartphones or laptops if they know how to use them, log in, enter their fruit grains, and any trader in India, be it in Maharashtra, be it in Tamil Nadu, be it in West Bengal, they can procure food grains from a farmer in Punjab. And this has all been possible due to ENAM scheme. And you can understand this directly leads to higher income realization for the farmers, right? Now, all these facts per se from prelims point of view is not very important. What is important is the trend that I've been highlighting you. What is important are the important concepts and the relation of one concept with another, right? Similarly, what has created more income for the farmers? Why do you think farmers are producing more and more food grains? Because the availability of the sellers in the market. One of the sellers in the Indian agricultural sector is government. Why? Because government every year, because before the sowing season, announces minimum support prices for the food grains. How many crops are covered into it? 22 cereals and grains, and one that is sugarcane. Sugarcane is covered not under MSP but under fair and remunerative price regime. So 22 plus 1 are the assurance of the prices for different commodities which is offered by the government, right? So MSP, when the government itself is procuring and giving them a minimum price, the farmers are confident in growing more and more crops and grains, knowing that the government is eventually going to procure them. Similarly, in the past few years, government has also started a PM Kisan scheme, where direct support in form of cash is provided, that is 6,000 rupees per year in 3 equal installments of 2,000 rupees each is provided to every land owning farmer in India. Yes, every land owning farmer is eligible to get 6,000 rupees per year or 2,000 rupees in 3 installments using the income support scheme, that is the PM Kisan scheme. And to add to that, to prevent farmers from getting distressed, to ensure social security to farmers, the government has started PM Kisan Man Dhan Yojana, which assures a pension support whenever the farmers want to stop working. It ensures a continuous social protection to do away with any problems that the farmers might face. Now let us talk about the sector which contributes largest to Indian economy. It is the services sector, right? As I told you, India is one of the biggest services exporter. India is world's 7th largest exporter of services. And share in global services trade in India, from India, it has actually doubled to 4.3% from 2% in 2005. Now, services share, how much is services contributing to India's economy? I told you it is more than 50%. It is, to be precise, 53.6%, right? So, which sector contributes to highest to the India's economy? Your answer is right in front of you, that is services sector. And how much is India's services exports are there? India's 7th largest exporter of services, contributing to 4.3% of total global services trade. Now, in the service sector, one of the important highlights that this sector itself is the largest recipient of FDI inflows. You'll be surprised, total of 80.2% of FDI comes to which sector? To services sector. And among services sector, it is the financial sector that is getting the highest amount of shares of services. Understood? Now, let us cover another sector, that is India's industrial sector. Now, industry is very important when it comes to employment generation. Currently, India's economy is witnessing structural transformation, but this structural transformation is inadequate, because for any economy to be structurally transformed, the surplus workforce from agriculture must move to manufacturing sector, and as your economy becomes developed, it should eventually move to services sector. So services sector is the highest employer in the advanced economies, right? So this is the adequate process of a structural transformation of the economy. But something different has happened in India. In India, the surplus labor of agriculture is not going to manufacturing, rather it is going to services. And this is the reason why services contribute to 53.6% of India's economy. Now government is cognizant of this fact. So that is why the government emphasis is to improve the levels of manufacturing so as to absorb the surplus labor from the agricultural sector and deal with the problem of the hidden employment, right? Now, one of this important initiative that has been introduced by the government is the production linked incentive scheme. In production linked incentive scheme, whichever company subscribes to the scheme, after subscribing to the scheme, how much increase they have got in their production levels, that increase will be eligible for incentives by the government, called as incremental production or sales. So after subscribing to the scheme, the increase in their sales and production will get incentivized by the government. And how many sectors are covered in it? 14 sectors are covered in it. And this has attracted how much investment? 2 lakh crore of actual investment. And how much employment it has created? 12.6 lakh jobs. So that is why I was saying government is looking at every effort in order to absorb surplus labor from the agricultural sector to deal with the problems of disguised unemployment by absorbing surplus labor in the manufacturing sector. And through PLI, it has been able to absorb how many jobs? 12.6 lakh jobs, not at all a small amount. Now, another leap in India's manufacturing sector is the levels of innovation. Who tells us the level of innovation? It is the Global Innovation Index. Which body is publishing Global Innovation Index? That is World Intellectual Property Organization. It shows that India's rank in global innovation has improved from 66 to 38. And one of the key factors in improving of innovation is government's focus in making India reliant in production of semiconductor. Now, what happened during COVID-19 pandemic? Production of semiconductors, which was concentrated in a handful of East Asian countries and China, got disrupted. And because of that, our production suffered even after the economy came out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So government thought, why not we set up semiconductor industries in India? And for that, India launched India Semiconductor Mission, where 10 semiconductor manufacturing units and packaging products have been approved across 6 states with an expected investment of how much rupees? Of 1.6 lakh crore rupees. And you can understand this would also create jobs. Which kind of jobs? Highly skilled jobs. Understood? Now, let us deal with investment and infrastructure. I told you government's focus has been on increasing its capital expenditure, which has increased how much? 4.2 times in the past 8 years. And the effective capital expenditure, which is the combination of center's capital expenditure and the grants it gives to the state government for capital creation, has also increased to how much amount? 15.4 lakh crore rupees. And India's domestic aviation sector has improved. India presently is world's third largest domestic aviation sector, and one of the schemes that has contributed to it, which you can understand, there are increase in number of airports from 74 in 2014 to 164 in 2025, and this has been due to Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik scheme, also called as the Udan scheme. Due to Udan scheme, what has happened, that government is looking to incentivize air travel. If you can recall, Prime Minister in his speech has said that his dream is that any person who wears a Hawaii chappal should be able to do Hawaii Yatra, which means making air travel more and more affordable, which means opening up of airports in uncovered regions, which means subsidizing the short distances air travel through smaller aircrafts. And this has happened through Udan scheme, and this has contributed to making India world's third largest aviation market after China and US. Now, one of the focuses of the government also has been to improve the levels of infrastructure. This is done through improvement in rail infrastructure and highway infrastructure. As you can understand, going forward, we are looking to make more faster roads, that is improving our national highways network and constructing more expressways. Similarly, rail infrastructure and modernization of railways become important because first of all, we need to lay down more railway lines, we need to electrify all the railway lines, and we need to make new railway lines which is well enough for high-speed rail trains to move over it. And this is one of the reasons why government is looking to invest so much in the bullet train infrastructure project, that the first project will start from Ahmedabad to Mumbai in quite a few years right now. Okay. Now, one of the key improvement that has happened in the infrastructure sector is power sector. Power sector was plagued by many problems. One of this was high levels of the AT&C losses, right? AT&C losses are basically transmission losses that happen. So every power to generate, less amount of power reaches to the household because of high losses during transmission phase. And this has been a problem due to the bad health of the distribution companies called as DISCOMs. Now, DISCOM companies, they were given many benefits through many schemes, and through that, there has been a reduction in AT&C losses from 22.62% to 15.04%. And because of this reduction in transmission losses, we have been able to bridge the demand supply gap from 4% to 0%, right? Now, one of the key ideas that you will get how much electricity we are producing is by understanding the total installed capacity. You know how much electricity do we generate? We have the capacity to generate almost 510 gigawatts of electricity. Now, covering the electricity, you need to understand, one is installation of electricity capacity, one is use of this electricity capacity in form of generation. Now, total of 49.83 power that we generate is generated through renewable sources. What are renewable sources of energy? Wind, hydro, solar, etc. Right? So these are the renewable energy which we rely on to generate clean energy. And how much we are generating clean energy? Very close to 50%. And globally, India ranks third when it comes to overall renewable energy capacity and installed capacity. And the total of 38.61 gigawatt of electricity of renewable energy capacity has been installed this year by solar, wind, as well as bio and hydro. So highest contribution this year was of solar power contribution in the renewable energy sector, right? So what did you understand? Total installed capacity is about 510 gigawatts. But when it comes to generation of electricity, very close to 50% of our total electricity is generated by renewable energy, that is a clean source of energy. Now let us talk about employment and skill development. One of the problems that we faced, that unemployed people faced in India, is that their skill development was not enough. India previously had only 5% of people who had gotten a formal skill training and only 10% more who has gotten any form of informal skill training. So if I add both of them, formal and informal skill training, only 15% of India's workforce was skilled anyway. So the priority of the government was to increase the skilling levels of the workforce because we are witnessing advancement in the levels of economy. And for that, government has created more jobs. It has created more jobs, especially in the manufacturing sector, which has showed 6% increase in total employment levels. And I was talking about the informalization of economy. One of the key developments is that the new labor codes that has been introduced by the government now formally recognizes gig and platform workers. By formally recognizing gig and platform workers, you can provide them social security, welfare funds and benefit portability, which is in line with the formalization of the economy. Similarly, for informal workers, the government has started an e-Shram portal where they can register themselves, and by registering themselves, they can get jobs linked to various platforms. Now, you'll be surprised to know women account for more than 50% of total registrants in the e-Shram portal, which shows that women are majorly there in the unregulated sector, in the unorganized sector, and government is looking an effort to make them or bring them into the formal sector. And for that, National Career Service Portal is a one-stop solution which would connect informal workers or job seekers with employers and training providers, so their end-to-end requirement, that is of skill training, of placement in education, is taken care of. Similarly, for improvement in the skilling infrastructure, government is upgrading the ITI institutes of India, that are industrial training institutes. Now, what has been the state of rural development? If you can recall, recently the World Bank has improved or updated the global poverty line. Earlier, anyone who was earning less than 2.15 US dollar was considered below poverty line. Now this threshold has been increased to US dollar 3 a day. So anyone who is earning less than US dollar 3 a day would be a poor person, and anyone earning more than $3 a day would be a above poverty line person. Considering this definition, India's extreme poverty rates have fallen down to 5.3%, and when lower middle income is considered, 23.9% people are covered in lower middle income category. So what this shows, that government through its welfare spending, through Manrega, through other welfare measures, have been able to reduce the levels of poverty rates in the country despite increasing of the threshold by the World Bank. Similarly, the social services expenditure on health, on education, on welfare has increased, and this stands at 7.9% of GDP, more than what was in the past few years. Now, one of the biggest problems that we faced in rural sector was that the land records were absent. So government is looking through Swamitwa scheme to conduct what is known as drone survey. Through drone survey, the government would first map all the lands, all the land parcels, and it would distribute the formal land records to the people who are owners. So in future, when it comes to land acquisition, the process becomes easier. The disputes that happens in rural areas because of the counter claims and claims people make over a piece of land would be reduced. And for that, the Namo Drone DD scheme would also provide drones to this Swamitwa scheme. Understood? Now, one of the key important aspects that the government has focused is on AI ecosystem. Now, there are multiple requirements of an AI ecosystem. The most famous of the AI tools that we witness are ChatGPT, Google Gemini. All of these mega AI generative tools have been developed by taking or making big, large language models. Now, this is something that India also wants to do. But to make a large language model yourself, you need first of all a lot of money. You need a lot of processing power that you get through graphic processing units or GPUs. And third, you need a very large set of data to train your AI model. Now, all these three requirements are right now not with India. And even if India gets this requirement, it would lead to a lot of spending of money. So to get the most out of it at the least possible cost, at the least possible effort, the government is looking to develop a smaller and task specific model which would be deployed across sectors. So suppose there is a requirement in the health sector. So a specific small language model would be trained that would cater specifically to the health sector. Likewise, for agricultural, for education, different small models will be created. And this shows that going forward, the appetite for AI systems at a local hardware and operate would be needed. And for that, you need more graphic processing units. For that, you need more data. For that, you need more data storage or data centers. And all of this development is happening at Indian economy at a very rapid scale. Now, the Namo Bharat Regional Rapid Transit Scheme is of urbanization. What is the biggest problem that we face in urbanization? It is high levels of congestion. Why do you think high levels of congestion happens in urban areas? Because most people migrate to urban areas in order to look for jobs. And when they get employed in an urban area, there is no other option for them but to live in an urban area. All of this contributes to congestion. All of this contributes to informal housing. All of this contributes to high amount of generation of solid waste. Now, government has come up with the solution. What if we deploy regional rapid transport systems which connects big urban areas to a peripheral small urban areas located in the close vicinity of 100 to 200 kilometers. So what would this do? This would first of all reduce the travel time between cities. So if you were working in Delhi, for example, you can commute daily from cities like Meerut. And the first rapid rail transport line has actually been set up between Meerut and Delhi. So this shows that you can reduce congestion from Delhi by letting people who work in Meerut travel daily at a quicker amount of time using what? Using regional rapid across transport. Similarly, in a similar manner, you would also develop a nearby peripheral areas, including the urban metropolitan cities. So urban metropolitan cities have become quite congested. What you need to do is diversify the economic activities to the outer regions. How you can diversify? By connecting those regions with a faster transport. And what provides you the faster transport? The regional transport levels, right? So it eases pressure on the metropolitan area, it supports polycentric growth, and it also expands to jobs to people who are living in faraway areas. So this is the benefit of rapid urbanization. Similarly, one of the key aspects of government is for import substitution. But you need to understand this Swadeshi or this Atmanirbhar Bharat is not a relentless import substitution, because government recognizes not all import substitution is feasible or even desirable. So what government has done? It has created a three-tiered framework. What is this three-tiered framework all about? This three-tiered framework distinguishes critical vulnerabilities with high strategic urgency. And to make something domestically, you need it to be strategic. Only strategic things for which we can't depend on other countries would be made here. And it also wants to have a high cost substitution. So things that are being made at an expensive cost abroad, the government would look to make this at a cheaper cost in India, which would give India cost advantage. So not just we are fulfilling our domestic requirements, but going forward, we can also become one of the key exporters of those goods and services. So this is what governments want through Atmanirbhar Bharat. It is not a blind pursuit of Swadeshi movement. It is a smart pursuit of Swadeshi movement, which can be called as an intelligent form of import substitution. And ultimately, it embeds India into a global system that people would not just buy Indian thinking that it is buying from India, but they would buy Indian goods without thinking. Why? Because Indian goods would be cost competitive, Indian goods would be excellent when it comes to quality, and India would be able to manufacture each and everything that is demanded across the country. So this brings an end to our today's discussion of economic survey. Now, before moving forward, what you need to understand, the topics that we covered was eventually based on an idea that you have a fair amount of Indian economy. Now, I teach economy in the foundation batches that happen in Study IQ IAS. The foundation batches are called as resolution batches. These batches are offered in different languages, in English, in Hindi, and in a bilingual format. You can take admissions to any of these batches. Right now, we are taking admissions in a January morning batch. And if you take admissions right now, not just you are going to get 77% off, but you are also going to get double validity on all the courses. So suppose if the previous course, if you had subscribed to, was available for 30 months, you can get this course for double the amount of time, that is 60 months. Right? All of this is benefit exclusive attached to our resolution batches. And if you use the code ATS Live, you are going to get even more discounts. The maximum discounts that you're going to get on our platform, you'll get it only when you apply the code ATS Live before you make the final payment in the promo code section, right? Please remember, the batches for 2027 and 2028 are offered separately, and decide accordingly to your target year. Do not forget, if you have to learn to thrive, you use the code ATS Live, and I take economy in the resolution batches in both bilingual and in English format, right? So please remember that. So this is all for my side for today. The notes of this session will be available on the Telegram channel called as ATS Live. I'll see you again tomorrow. Please have a very good day, and do let me know what do you feel about this economic survey in the comment section. So I take your permission. Please have a very good day.